Thank you for tuning in to the Logic of God podcast. I'm Cody.
I'm Gina.
And I'm Ben.
If you're returning, thank you for coming back. And if you are a new guest, welcome.
So we are jumping into the next section of Exodus chapter 3, starting with verse 7. Then the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now, behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? He said, But I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. Why would God be saying you shall serve God? Anyway, then Moses said to God, If I come to the people of Israel and say to them, The God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, What is his name? What shall I say to them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, Say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, Say this to the people of Israel, The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations. Go and gather the elders of Israel together and say to them, The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob has appeared to me, saying, I have observed you and what has been done to you in Egypt, and I promise that I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. And they will listen to your voice, and you and the elders of Israel shall go to the king of Egypt and say to him, The Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us, and now please let us go a 3 days' journey into the wilderness, that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. But I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless compelled by a mighty hand. So I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all the wonders that I will do in it. After that, he will let you go. And I will give this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. And when you go, you shall not go empty, but each woman shall ask of her neighbor, and any woman who lives in her house, for silver and gold jewelry and for clothing. You shall put them on your sons and on your daughters. So you shall plunder the Egyptians. That's a lot.
Yes, it is.
So I jumped into this crazy deep study of all of the different tribes that are mentioned here because I think it's relevant to church history. I want to cover what comes before them before we jump into them.
Go for it.
So the Lord saying in verse 7, he's seen the affliction of his people. This reminded me so much of Sodom and Gomorrah, and saying that they heard the cry. Like, it was an extra biblical source that said, like, it was a young girl or something, but they heard the cry of the afflicted in Sodom and Gomorrah, and Jesus came with the angels and destroyed it. And like here, Jesus is back saying something very similar and promising something very different. But he, instead of a whole fire over the city, he's just a fire in a bush.
But he does punish the city.
He does, but differently.
We should make a mental note to look at the gods of Sodom and Gomorrah, or that specific region, to see if those correspond with the gods like the plagues of Egypt do.
Yeah, that would be an interesting thing to look at.
Yeah, so we have some comparing and contrasting. It makes me think about the idea of the death penalty today and people who are like, they deserve to suffer and think about what they did, but then there's people that are like, they deserve to die. Jesus does both.
Yeah.
Okay, why do we care about milk and honey? It's just because it was a commodity?
So this is actually one of the phrases I love the most in the Bible. because with it, God is literally telling them everything they need to know about the land, like everything. So when you think about milk and honey, what do you need to have milk and what do you need to have honey?
You need plants like grazing and wildflowers and
You need the plants and you need the animals. You need bees and you need cows. But what do bees and cows need?
plants.
But is it the same kinds of
Grass.
plants? Yeah. So
Grazing.
they need
Broad.
good, beautiful grasslands for grazing for the cows. And for the bees, they need flowers.
They need green pastures to lie down in.
They need both a wooded area, because for natural bees, they like to make their nests, their hives, in forests and trees. And for cows, they need pasture land. They need open areas, nice vast areas of grass. Both of those have their uses if you're trying to establish settlements. Vast open lands with cows and stuff, that's your food, but also places for you to plant crops and build your homes. But what do you need to build your homes with? You need trees. And the trees in the forests is where the honey is flowing from, with all of the vast trees that you would have all of these bees, and also all of the different other kinds of plants that those bees would need in order to pollinate and germinate. So it is a place of abundant life. It is a place of abundant natural resources that they can use for food. And it's also a place of other types of resources that they can use to build and to establish and cultivate to make farms and homes.
But these are ancient peoples, man. They lived in mud huts. Why would they need that stuff? It's because we've got to get out of our heads. They weren't just living in tents. It's genuinely confusing to me to look at high school textbooks and the way that stuff is dated, and even science, the way that stuff is dated, because there's so much conflicting information. My kids have gone to both public school and private school, and then I also went to public school, and Cody was homeschooled. We have a lot of variety in the different resources that we've been exposed to for these lessons, and it's funny to me how nobody can agree on dating, which is important because so many archaeological finds lately have proven that cultures were literate when they weren't really thought to be. So these are very intelligent people. The Egyptians especially had very advanced technology that we don't understand to this day. So to assume that they wouldn't have needed those things is silly.
But also, I think the Lord is letting them know that there is so much there, but it's going to take work.
Yes.
It's not that the land is prepared for them already. It's that everything that they need, all that is good here, they will have everything they need to establish themselves, but they will need to work on it.
And I just want to clarify, because I put it in the very beginning of our outline, but Moses lived during what we believe is the late Bronze Age, which would be Egypt's empire, Canaanite city-states, and then the Exodus and conquest debates. So the Bronze Age was like one of the most incredible ages of mankind for invention and learning how to make things that they couldn't previously make, especially with metal. So I think believing that resources would have been less important to them is silly. But I've heard it taught that way. That's why I make that
It's a weird take. I don't know why anyone would teach it that way.
Oh my gosh. They're stupid because they lived too long ago to be smart. Anyway, I mention all of that because we're jumping in now to the different cultures that the land belongs to, that they're being promised. So the Canaanites and the Hittites and all of that. And they were very intelligent, and archaeology has shown quite a lot of information about them. So, you know me, I get really excited when I see genealogies and names and things. So I jumped in and I looked into the Canaanites and all of these different groups of people and what these names meant and what these people did and why Jesus cared. And I think we take for granted the idea that Moses was promised to get people out of Egypt. But he's naming all of these different clan groups that they're going to be up against that are famous for warfare and invention and progress. And these are enslaved people who in Joseph's time were like farmers. They were shepherds. So if you're an Israelite getting told by Moses, I'm going to get you out of here, and God says we're going to get this land, I would laugh at him. Just straight up, I would laugh at him. And I think that's why God is like, these are the signs
And it's also why it needed to be that the Israelites were shown how powerful God was before they were going to be brought to this land. And we're eventually going to see, even seeing all the things that God does, it's not enough to prepare them. The second they actually get to the land and see the people they're going to have to fight, they go, nope, we're not doing it.
Yeah.
So even after everything that God does, the people still doubt. And we make fun of the Israelites. We always are constantly saying, oh, they're so dumb and stupid. God is always doing stuff and they always forget. So do we. I've seen God do incredible things in my own life and in other people's lives. And right now, when things are starting to get confusing and I don't know where my life's going and I don't know where Gina and Cody's lives are going so much, there's so much up in the air. It's when all the questions come out and all the anger flares up. You're like, Lord, why can't you make things clear? He doesn't have to. We've lived long enough to see him do great things. And you don't think you think he's going to stop now? I don't know what's wrong with me. And as a result, I get why Israel makes the mistakes it does.
Yeah. So things to remember when we go through this section. These names should not be treated as modern nations with fixed borders. They are a mixture of genealogical names, regional labels, city-state populations, and social geographic terms. Canaanites were not a single unified empire. They were a broader cultural world of city-states, villages, and local rulers, often clashing with Egyptians or working with the Egyptians, sometimes even under the rule of the Egyptians. It depends on the era and the scholar because they don't all agree. Being conscripted under Solomon. Later in the Bible, you hear about these tribes being conscripted under Solomon, which meant that they became slaves for Israel. It's an interesting inverse to what we see in this part of the story because right now they're very powerful nations, but over time, through the history of the church, through the history of the prophets, through the history of the kings, we see that these people become minimized, but they become absorbed as well. And Cody made a point to me the other day about being conscripted meant that they became part of the Israelite culture, which meant that they belonged to God. He reclaimed them, is what you said.
I don't know necessarily in this sense, because a lot of these cultures are told to completely wipe out. God promised that he would never wipe out the entire earth with a flood again, but that doesn't mean that his judgment is not being enacted through Israel here and that these cultures should have been wiped out like Sodom and Gomorrah. I don't know why the conquest of Israel, people have a major hang up with that versus the flood sometimes or Sodom and Gomorrah. Everybody's okay. Those were just evil people. But
what's interesting with the conquest of Israel is that there are multiple points going forward where we're told about Uriah the Hittite or the guy that sells David his plot of land when there's the plague that God unleashes. There are a bunch of individuals that we see are righteous people from the descendants of the people that they were meant to wipe out. And when bad things happen to either good things can be done through them, which God approves, or bad things are done to them, which God does not. Even the wiping out of the Gibeonites, which Saul does to try to please God, God is not pleased with. And even the forced conscription of all of these various peoples, that leads to the splitting of the kingdom. That's literally the inciting incident. After Solomon dies and his son takes over, all of the people are like, hey, could we not be worked so hard, please? And his son is an idiot, and he goes, no, I'm going to work even harder. And so all of the people rebel, and Israel is split. So it's not portrayed as a good thing when Solomon takes all of these people and conscripts them into forced labor. I can't say.
It's a hard word.
Yeah.
So, but it's interesting because, so I wrote Cody a message and then I ended up copying and pasting it into our group chat, which we never really got the opportunity to explore. But when you think about morality as a Christian or just as a human being and what you think of as good, like the definition of good, slavery is one of those things that's been drilled into our heads from a very early time in our lives that slavery is bad. Slavery is evil. People don't deserve to be slaves. And of course, I agree, like slavery is wrong and we should not be instituting slavery, especially today. But I think from God's perspective, looking at slavery differently is important. And like we have emotional connections towards, and so we tend to shy away from them and like ideology and stuff. I think In order for us to truly understand God's purpose in some of these stories, we have to take away the definitions that are in our mind. Because like what we think of as sovereignty, what we think of as good, is not necessarily what God thinks of those things.
The modern sensibility where when we say slave, we associate that with specific groups of people being labeled as less than others and less brought in, and then entire groups of people just being slaves. That is a fairly old idea. Like literally the word slave is a derivative of Slav, as in Slavic people. There were literally millions of them taken into the Arabic slave trade and the European slave trade over the course of 1,000 years. So much so that people just associated the idea that if you see a Slavic person, they're probably a slave. But going back to this point, well, yes, you could argue that there were certain people who, so many of them were put into forced servitude, that was the association with them. That's not what slavery meant. And it's definitely not what the Bible endorses. In fact, I would argue it doesn't endorse slavery at all.
It's like my question, isn't slavery wrong? Like, why would God rescue the Israelites from slavery only to enslave another people?
It's not that he does it specifically to cause that. And the Bible never says that it was right for them to enslave other peoples. But there's a further question. Let's say that you're a person, an individual, not an entire group of people, but an individual. And your wife and children are starving, you're starving, and so you don't really have a lot of options. So what do? If no one's hiring you, but you go to a family, a wealthy family, and you say, I will work for you as long as you give me food, and my family food and housing. That's a form of payment because they're paying you in terms of food and shelter. And there are rules in place. If they ever strike you and break a tooth, or strike you and break a bone, or strike you and leave a permanent mark, you are automatically free. You can leave. But as long as they treat you well, and they feed you, and they adhere to a strict set of commands, you are allowed to stay there and be paid for food. And after a certain amount of time passes, you can leave no matter what. And if you choose to stay there forever and have your family stay there forever, then you can stay. But all of that is in your hands. That's not what we would associate with slavery, but that's what the Bible describes as slavery. It says everyone has rights, that all of you are children of God, image bearers of God, and thus there's a certain standard of treatment for all parties involved. But if you have nothing, no money to pay and no ability to be paid, you have the ability to work for food and work for shelter. That makes sense to me, especially in the ancient world where money was a lot harder to come by. And it made a lot more sense for a class of people to exist who work specifically for food and shelter, provided they are treated correctly.
If you look at just economics, that is bartering economics.
Yes.
You don't have to be a slave to barter in that way. We just don't live like that right now.
No, it's a completely different way of living. It's a completely different mentality. And to be fair, I'm glad that way of living no longer needs to exist. It is good that it no longer exists. That doesn't mean that it was evil back in the day when it was necessary. And I don't even know that I would use as strong a word as necessary, and yet I can see why it existed.
Yeah. Just the idea of consumerism, like to have a kitchen table. Like if you had a kitchen table, it was because you either made it or someone in your family made it generations before you. It was not like, oh, let me pop over to IKEA and put it together in my living room. No, stuff was precious because it was rare to have the things that you needed. Like today, Cody and I were just talking about it. Like you get a hole in your jeans, you replace them, but they mended them. It's just we can't really put ourselves into that context because we don't fully understand it coherently as just how we live today. The society that we're in is so far from that.
You mean, like I've been saying, background study is very important? It's actually important?
Yes.
No, background study is widely important. And as Ben said, like, this is one of those things. There's almost an entire class at Moody, like, dedicated to tackling the slavery problem in Scripture. And, like, to me, it's not that difficult. Yeah, slavery is bad, but I honestly don't view the American workforce much differently than how slavery is depicted. It's an evolution of slavery. There are set rules that companies can adhere to make you do what they want you to do. You're doing what they want you to do, not what you want to do. And there's rules for that. And when those rules were broken, like that's why unions exist now. Companies were breaking these like standard labor rules. So they needed advocates in the US and unionized, and unions exist now because of that. They've outlived their terms and are terrible now in most senses, but it is like this ebb and flow and evolution of slavery. You're still doing something for somebody else that you wouldn't do unless you had to.
And there are certain things that we are required to do as modern Americans we don't believe to be slavery, but technically, under the strictest definitions, would be classified as that. For instance, Cody, you and I are both men. I don't know if you guys can tell from the podcast.
We had an incident this morning. It was questionable. Maybe it's just a deep voice.
Who knows? But Cody and I are both men. We both were required by law to sign up for the draft when we were 18. We don't have a choice in that. If we said no, we could have been imprisoned, and there were all kinds of penalties that could have been forced on us. So we needed to sign up for the draft. If our number is ever pulled up for the draft, we have to go serve our country and fight. And when we're doing that, whatever order we're given, we have to follow. We don't have the option to say, no, forget you. I'm an individual, man. You can't force me to do anything. I'm an image bearer of God. I can do whatever I want. No, that's not what happens in the arena of war. So if I'm in a situation where I don't have a choice, I had to sign up for this. And if my number is called, I have to go and I have to serve my country and I have to fight even if I don't want to. And whatever orders I'm given, I have to follow. That sounds kind of like slavery, don't it? But no, I'm given money. Very little money, depending on what role I fill. And it's not money I get to negotiate for. It's no, I am told that is the amount I'm given. So is that slavery? Under the strictest definition, I would argue certainly yes. And yet we don't call it that. And I would agree, the spirit of it is not slavery. But it all depends on your perspective. And so there are certain things that Moses allowed. And I would say it's not necessarily that God said was good, but was allowed, like divorce. This is even something brought up in the New Testament, where Jesus says you can't divorce. That's not what's meant to be. And everyone was like, wait, hold on. Moses said we can do that. And Jesus specifically says, Moses allowed you to do it because your hearts were hard. There were things that were allowed to be done in the past because it's the way it was always done. That was the only thing that the people knew. And if certain things were taken away, the people wouldn't have listened anyway. So you put guardrails up, you force people to do things the best way, the best bad thing, basically. Slavery's not good, but if you must practice it, if these people are going to be pig-headed and stupid, and they're going to do it no matter what, then this is the way that they will have to practice it for it to be allowable. Doesn't mean it's good, but it's the best way to practice a bad thing.
Even being a citizen of any kind of country, there's rules that you have to adhere to, otherwise you're punished. You can get punished if you don't adhere to laws. Is that considered slavery?
There are all sorts of weird gray areas, you're right, Cody, that we can navigate. If I go to another country and I see that there's a piece of literature on the wall that I want to take down and take with me, and I'm in Singapore, or I litter in Singapore, they got some pretty harsh punishments in Singapore.
What, they'll beat you in the streets?
Oh, yeah. A bunch of angry men with canes are going to come out and they'll give you a fierce caning. I didn't sign up for that. I didn't accept that. Too bad.
You have no choice.
So yeah, the version of slavery presented to us in the Bible where people sign up for it.
And say thank you.
And if they're mistreated, they get to leave. Yeah, I don't see as the same thing as that.
No, what we're seeing today is illegal, illicit, abusive, not right, violation of all sorts of human rights. And that's the point I'm trying to make. We're not saying, oh, we're enslaved because we work. No, we're just explaining the exchange is no different. And we're on a hamster wheel generationally that we really haven't gotten off of, but we don't understand. So, jumping in. The Canaanites. The Canaanites, to me, always seemed like the boss of all the other ones. And I think that's why I always just generalized all of these as Canaanites. And I've heard it taught that way. And I think that's where it came from. So going through this was interesting for me because I researched all of them. But the Canaanites occupied the broader Levantine corridor, coastal and inland regions of modern Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, western Jordan, and parts of southern Syria. That's an enormous amount of land. It makes sense that this is not just one culture. It's a bunch of different groupings of people. They are descended from Canaan, son of Ham. Genesis chapter 10 describes Sidon, Heth, Jebusites, Amorites, Girgashites, Hivites, and other clans under Canaan. A lot of these clans are descended from Canaan in their bloodlines. Canaanites were known for fortified city-states, trade networks, Bronze Age urban culture, early alphabetic writing traditions, temple cults, fertility religion, political dependence on Egypt during much of the late Bronze Age. And then I listed their gods. Cody, you can talk about their gods.
This region, so like this is the land of Canaan. Like where they're going, the promised land is the land of Canaan. All of these tribes that are listed are Canaanites. Like they're from the land of Canaan.
But not all of them are bloodlines of Canaan.
All of these listed are, yes.
I don't think so.
Heth is a Hittite. Amorites are listed in here.
There was one or two. Yeah, Perizzites are not listed in Genesis 10. They are grouped with Canaanite people in conquest lists, but their name is more mysterious, and their title is not named in Genesis 10 in the genealogy.
I would venture to say that they're still descendants of Canaan.
Could be,
this area.
But I'm not going to say that because it's not written in the Bible.
Geographically, it's highly likely. So the gods of the Canaanites, so you have them connected a lot to the Ugaritic, like the veil cycle. So that's these same gods. So like Ashtarte, El, Baal, Dagon, like all fit within this region of gods. And I think when you go through this, I haven't gone through the entire list, but a lot of them actually share gods.
And they have different names, but they're the same god.
Yeah, Ashtarte is very connected to Ishtar. So fertility, queen of heaven.
Sexuality.
Sexuality, fertility, sometimes war, different things like that. And I think they're actually both connected to Venus, which Roman and Greek gods connected later. Same thing, same idea. Seem to be the same god, which is interesting in a divine council aspect.
So then you have the Hittites. Heth is the descendant of Canaan. That is the Hittites. Known for diplomacy, chariot warfare, treaty traditions, cuneiform archives, fortifications, power struggles with Egypt. They have some other gods that were not connected with Canaan that I could find, like Hatti or like Tarhunt. Some of those names actually, and like the sun goddess Arina, some of those seem to have Egyptian influence.
So a lot of these actually do. Even Ashtarte is brought up in Egyptian literature, and I think later on you'll see Horan is actually connected to Horus of Egypt. A lot of these A&E gods are very connected, but not all of their Semitic languages was derived from the same area, or it split so much that translating them to English does not carry the same similarity in wording structure, if that makes sense. So that could be described way better by somebody more knowledgeable, but yeah.
Phonetically, they sound different.
Phonetically was the word that I was looking for.
So the history of the Hittites so far that we've seen, Abraham purchases Machpelah from Ephron the Hittite. And we'll see, and Esau marries a Hittite woman, or multiple Hittite women. But we will see the Hittites again. The Amorites are known as widespread Westerners from Mesopotamia, could mean the northern region of Canaan in this context. They are included in the Canaanites in Genesis 10. They were known for pastoral, nomadic roots, powerful dynasties, control of the highland and Transjordanian territories, association with warrior kings, founding or ruling major Mesopotamian centers, including Babylonian dynasties, and Hammurabi's Babylonian dynasty is often described as Amorite in origin. And they have some other gods. They have some same gods, though, with different spelling. And then we won't talk about their fate later because it's relevant to Exodus. Perizzites are not listed in Genesis 10. They're thought to be like rural people, like vulnerable clan that we really don't know a lot about. They were just villagers, and it could be title rather than name. And that's what I think. So Cody and I disagreed about them being descendants of Canaan. I don't know. To me, it's maybe more like a Jethro Reuel situation where their title is Perizzite because of maybe the socioeconomic standing instead of their family. And we see them again in Judges, but we really don't hear a lot about notable people. Hivites, biblically acknowledged descendants of Canaan, but little is known about them as well or academically acknowledged. They're associated with central Canaan through the Gibeon story and may also have northern associations in biblical lists, like in Joshua. They were deceptive people. The Hivites were deceptive people to the Gibeonites. And we see this is one of the Saul stories that we'll read later, and Joshua traditions as well. Jebusites tied to Jerusalem. Oh, this was the one I wrote that text about. And this is the last one. And I find it interesting that God names them last because they're tied to Jerusalem, which is also known as Jebus. And it's formerly seen as Melchizedek's land in Genesis. And this is where my question came. I might ask it, but it's biblically acknowledged as the bloodline of Canaan. They were known for holding Jerusalem before David, controlling a defensible hill city, surviving into Israel's early monarchy, being one of the last Canaanite groups absorbed into Israelite political control. There's a lot in the Bible that I included that I'm not going to read because we'll talk about it later. I just wanted it for future. Their gods are interchangeable with the other clans, and we really don't have a lot of archaeology on this one because Jerusalem has been torn down and built up and torn down and built up to the point where the archaeology is unreliable or impossible to get to. So I'm going to read my question about this group, or just triggered by this, because it felt really interesting at the time. So I said in our group chat, I need help exploring Melchizedek being the king of Jerusalem, because now the Jebusites are ruling over Jerusalem. If Melchizedek is a divine council figure, like we talked about, it could imply that the region was ruled by God and that the ruler was not an Israelite or chosen one of God in terms of the Israelites. If this is the case, it changes how God interacts with his chosen people and implies that before Abraham, the region would have been dedicated to God, while after Abraham and the dispersion of his descendants, the dedication of the region is preserved through the direction of the people and the lack of dedication from them to fulfill the covenant. This makes the promised people a tool to enforce the covenant rather than a beloved nation, which makes so much sense to me. I always wrestle with why God loved the Israelites more, but there's a lot of evidence that God didn't love them more. He used them to make a spectacle of all mankind and the contrast of God's goodness versus human goodness and the lack thereof. If this is the case, it redefines love, grace, mercy, and divinity. And this aligns with Jethro, like we talked about in the last episode, being a man of God despite being outside the civilization of Israel, which kind of ties into our talk on slavery and just how we don't understand the word biblically.
It's a lot there.
Yeah.
To cover the end there, yes, I do think Israel was used as a show of what God's people should look like. And they had a very specific purpose. This is not, and I hate to beat a dead horse, but this is not like the elect chosen. Every single Israelite is the elect chosen going there. That means everybody outside of them. Jethro couldn't have been of God because he was not an Israelite. Well, all of this nonsense and not understanding the actual context and clan mentality and reading modern understanding into ancient texts. Just so much there.
Yeah. I just think God will go to any length to fulfill and enforce the covenants. And calling on, because in this chapter, God calls on references the names of, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He says it 3 times. And I feel like he isn't just calling on the heritage of who this guy's family is. He's calling on the heritage of the covenant. He's drawing the attention back to that.
And if you look at later when Jacob I have loved, Esau I have hated, the love is in regard to covenantal love. He loved Jacob in a covenantal sense and hated Esau because it was outside of covenant. 1, those aren't individual people. They are nations at this point. And 2, the nation of Israel was supposed to be the one bringing in the new covenant, which they did. And Edomites were not doing that. And very frankly, historically, and why they are deemed as hated, he rejected covenant. That was what Esau was known for. That's what his people were known for, was rejecting covenant. So yes, in a covenantal sense, God loved Israel, Jacob, the one pursuing covenant. He hated Esau, the one rejecting covenant purpose. Read it in context.
It reminds me of being a mom and having 3 children. And there is a general love that I feel for my family. But on my average Tuesday, when I'm trying to get my kids to go to school in the morning and I'm dragging them out of their beds and making them brush their teeth, and one is crying because she doesn't want to eat a pear, and the other one is eating a pear, and then the other one is, I forgot my lunch, and like all of the chaos of having these children, and every moment with them sometimes feels chaotic, and they're all wanting different things, asking for different things, feeling different things, experiencing different things, and wanting to tell me about it all at the same time. I know that God is infinitely powerful and attentive, and yet thinking about if I am God and my children are the people I have created, I can understand wanting to just fulfill the promise of the day. I need to get you to school. That is the mission. Rather than, oh, sweetheart, let's be late to school and I'll make you a full bacon breakfast and you can tell me all of your feelings and I'll take 45 minutes for each of you to talk nonstop and not take a breath. That's how I see God fulfilling this covenant. Is, do I love my children? Do I want to know these things about them? Sure, yeah, I do. I care. I want them to have what they want and need. But at the same time, there's something to be done that's more important. And when we look at it from that lens, instead of, but God, I want it and you're not listening to me and you're not giving me what I want. Okay, but I'm just a stupid little kid who's complaining about nonsense and there's a mission at hand.
Even if you look at parenting, one, what are you raising your kids for? It's not so you constantly have to take care of them. It's so that they have purpose and they can live their own lives and fulfill what being a human is about. And when you look at God's relationship with Israel and them being the chosen people who are supposed to show what being a nation under God looks like and bring other nations back to God, just forecasting the biblical arc of Scripture is like, what are we going to be doing? We're still going to be actively participating and growing and developing and doing things, even in the New Jerusalem to come. God is focused on incorporating people to deliver His will, enact His will. And it's not that He doesn't want everyone to come in. It's not that everybody is not as important as others. He's wanting to incorporate the help of His creation. The same way that you love cooking with Ellie or Shiloh or Madeline, but you also want them to start doing stuff themselves for themselves, like Madeline cooking. Like,
yeah,
go do it. You don't need me. I don't need to hold your hand for every little thing. And we've talked about that a lot. People don't let go of Jesus. They just want to hold on to Jesus or sit in His lap and just be infantilized the entire time. And instead of taking up the banner of Christianity and going with it and multiplying and making disciples and discipling.
We live our lives feeling like, we had a talk yesterday, Cody and I had a talk yesterday about somebody in my life that I'm struggling in my relationship with because of my mother. And one of the things that I said that just, it hits home for me as an adult is like, growing up, we owe explanations. We owe our parents an explanation. We owe our school explanations. We're constantly explaining and justifying our existence, not just out of necessity, but out of insecurity. And especially as a female, that's something that I faced heavily is I want to wear this makeup because, and I had to explain it, even if it was just like, I like it. And then I was eating a salad at dinner and I was like, munching on it, not really thinking, and we were talking. And then I looked down and I was like, this salad tastes disgusting. I don't have to eat this salad. I don't have to explain why I don't like this salad. Nobody cares why I don't like this salad. I'm not eating this salad. Those are decisions that I have to be intentional about making, and I don't owe anybody an explanation. I don't owe people information. So when it comes to my faith, when it comes to this study, needing permission, the only one that we owe that explanation to is God. But we live our lives like, oh, we're going to care and we have influencer culture and we're embarrassed, whatever. No, just live it. If God told you, live it. Don't explain it. Live it. Because when God explains in this next little section that we're going through after the list of all these people, Moses is like, who am I? Stop asking that. But it's so real. It's honest.
Yeah, I can't remember who I listened to recently about Moses, but he connected him to Jonah in a way that I was like, oh, wow, that's really there. Because a lot of the prophets that you see when they're called are just like, okay, yes, Elijah's, yes, Lord. And Moses says, oh my, and I'm not a good speaker, and this and that. Seems like he's really wanting to get out of what he's called to do.
It's so human because normal people would be like, who even are you? Even though he already said, I would go, and how can I believe that you are who you say you are? Moses says, who am I? He's thinking about himself, and that's our selfish human, I do what I do not want to do, the thing. It makes Moses so relatable.
Oh, yeah.
What do you mean? I've got all these sheep. I've led them around the mountain, and now I have to go and save an entire civilization.
Considering where he's coming from, like he just fled for his life. It was a while ago at this point. But he spent a lifetime growing up under the Egyptians and then spent a while amongst his own people. His own people reject him, and the Egyptians definitely reject him. And now he's a wanderer. But he's got a family. He's got people who he loves and respects and who love and respect him. He's got a kid now. And now suddenly, no, go back. And more than that, I'm going to rain all kinds of fiery vengeance.
Yeah, God, I'm going to raise my hand and smack them. Don't want that.
No, he's very open with Moses what's going to happen. And you're going to go ask for this, but they're not going to give a crap. I'm going to have to smite them, basically. And he's very forward with it. I could understand why you would want to try and get out of that, like Jonah and Nineveh.
But gracious Lord actually answers his questions and gives him. It's really confusing for me. These were some sticking points for me in this chapter was like the sign. What do you mean this is a sign? Why is this a meaningful sign? It's verse 12. But I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. I don't really understand that. Maybe because I haven't read far enough in Exodus to understand what that looks like. But I don't find, if I were Moses in this position, I would be like, what do you mean?
I think basically what God is saying is he's telling Moses the future and that he will know who God is and that God has told the truth when he has come back to this mountain and they worship him here. He's basically telling him, I see the future. See how things will be. This is how you will know. It's not just that I can do great things, do wonders, because even the Egyptian gods can do that. But God is beyond that. He is beyond all of time. And this is even proving his name, which we haven't got to yet. But when God finally gives him the name, I am who I am, or I will be who I will be, God knows who he is and who he will be, independent of time. And so simply telling Moses, this is what's going to happen. And once it happens, then you will know. That's the sign.
Yeah. I think for me, that just trying to process, going from point A to point B for me is nothing. I get in my car and I go. It would have been a feat for Moses to have to get all the way back to that mountain after facing what he knew would be certain death in Egypt. So I could see that being a sign now that the way that you explained it.
Well, and I think it will be interesting looking at this now and having that mentally marked. And is there anywhere in the text that Moses goes back and he's, okay, God, does his mentality change when he gets back here? Does he give reverence to God in a way that we've missed before? I think we should look out for Moses coming to realization of that sign of God.
Yeah. So we have the who am I, then we have the who are you? And God's I am who I am. It is what it is.
The true divine name of God.
Yes.
Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. This is not a name that even traditional Jewish people will ever use.
Yeah, no.
Just saying Yahweh, and for those of you who weren't with us for the journey through Genesis, God's name is not Yahweh. This is what we call him because Yahweh means he is. But the name that God uses is not he is, it's I am. And to say I am, you say Ehyeh. And he doesn't simply say Ehyeh, he says Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. So that is the full divine name that God gives to Moses.
Why should Christians care about this? It's just another name, right? We have Jehovah Rapha. We have all of these names for God. It's just another name. Why do we care?
We shouldn't care about the name God literally gives.
But he has all these titles and names. Who even knows? Why would a Christian care? This is the attitude of the church. This is why I'm asking. It's not because I think that.
So looking at the context of I will be what I will be, or I am who I am. Like, I think, again, looking at ancient Near East, the gods of the A&E were very tied to regions or to specific purposes. You have storm gods, you have fertility gods, you have all of these different contexts that humans put on gods. And in some regards, like the other religious ritual texts and rite texts, like you can control a god to a sense in knowing what they do and how they function. And this could be God breaking that complete context there. I will be what I want to be. I will be what I will be. And I love Dr. Stephen DeYoung's discussion in literature on this, because this is also a verb. It is like the existing one. So the Septuagint translates this specific phrase into the Greek. So it takes the Hebrew from the Greek and says the existing one, or the one who existed, or the one who created. And it's existed in the sense of like creating. So God's also putting a sense of verb into this as well.
So it's action. It's not just presence.
Correct.
And building off of what you said, Cody, not just for the names of gods, but for the names of people in general. Like back in the day, people gave names based on the qualities that defined you, based on who you were, either visual qualities or the things that you act out.
Or who you were the son of.
And these things largely defined you. They encapsulated you as a person. That was the whole point. Renaming Jacob to Israel is meant to show his growth as a person, but also to say you were no longer the grasper, the supplanter. Your nature has changed. I have changed you. You are now the one who sojourns with God, who wrestles with God and prevails. And I will prevail through you. That's incredibly profound. But when you get to God, inherent in the question when Moses asks is, okay, what is your nature? It's not just what is your name. It's, okay, what about you can I wrap my head around? What is it you are? It's not just what we call you, it's what are you? And the response to that is, I am. I am all things. Whatever will be, I am. Whatever has happened, I am. Wherever you go, I am. It ties God to all places. It ties God to all times. It ties God to everything that ever has existed, that exists now, and ever will exist. It makes him unknowable. God is saying, I am unknowable, and that is what you will call me forever. You can't pin me down. You can't control me. You can't wrap your head around what I am, because I am.
It opens the door to what I have for Exodus 6.
Huzzah!
Are we going there right now?
No.
Okay, we'll save it.
Questions for later.
Yes.
But remember, you need to listen to this again before we go to Genesis 6, because
Exodus 6.
Yeah. Yeah. We're not in Genesis.
I'm pretty sure I said Abraham instead of Moses a while back.
So God tells Moses to tell both the Israelites and the elders of Israel. Why both? What's the difference? And is this divine council elders or something, or is it just old people? Because they haven't established officially anything in hierarchy that we're aware of yet. But we know there's tribes. Is it tribal leadership?
So I think inside of the Israelite context, there would be the elders like any other nation.
Elected elders or just old people?
Probably a little bit of both. Being old meant you had more wisdom in these contexts. So probably a little bit of both.
So people, even without giving prompting, usually assort themselves into a pecking order. And for men, this is especially true. I don't know how it works for ladies. But for men, you throw a whole bunch of strangers into an area where nobody knows anyone else and you give them a job to do, they will naturally sort themselves into a hierarchy based on who knows the most. That's not always the oldest, but usually it is the oldest. Usually the guy who's been around and seen some stuff and who's worked around this kind of thing his whole life just knows stuff. And if you want the job to be done quickly and effectively, that's automatically the guy it makes sense you talk to. And so even if there isn't an election process or some means by which people democratically select some dude to rule them, there will naturally be a person that people will gravitate towards, who they will ask for advice or ask for a ruling and will give it, and people will obey, not because there is some political authority, but just because there's authority inherent in wisdom.
No, and like we covered the mentality when in Genesis with Judah, his sons all died, so he was responsible for Tamar at that point and all of that stuff. There is the head of the household mentality in all of these ancient civilizations, especially Israel, that they would point back to those individuals basically carrying on the name of the house.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so God tells Moses to ask Pharaoh for permission for a 3-day journey to make a sacrifice to God. That's not what I expected. A 3-day journey that they come back from.
Yep.
Interesting.
That is one of the more interesting aspects of the story. In a story packed full of interesting details, what God tells Moses to do initially is not to demand the people be released completely, but to have a reasonable ask. Just let us go worship God.
Yeah.
And from our past ones, we know that any kind of sacrifice to Yahweh would have been detestable to the Egyptians. And this is also, Moses is going back, claiming his allegiance when he's doing this. He's, okay, I'm going to sacrifice animals that are connected to your gods, like asking permission to do that. So he's asking permission to sacrifice animals connected to their gods, which is going to be not okay with them. And I do think this was like, we're just going to ask to go and leave and just not come back.
I don't know that's what would have happened. It's tough to know what would have happened. But we see a number of times throughout the Bible where there are points where God gives people basically a choice. This is how things could be. If you let things play out in the way that I ask or the way that I am presenting to you, things will be equitable for everyone. We see this with one of the Israelite kings who was dying, and God says, you are literally going to die. And he says, no, please don't do that. Save my life. And so his life is saved. But as a result, the Babylonians come and take everything because he shows off all of the wealth of Israel. But another interesting example was a guy who was like a foreign king. I think he was king of the Syrians, who was told that he was going to recover. And that's what the prophet was supposed to say. However, the prophet starts breaking down and crying. I'm sorry. It's just, I know that's not going to happen because you, the guy I'm talking to, is going to murder the king and you're going to become king. So it's both we're told what's going to happen, but that doesn't happen because someone else comes in to stop the guy from getting healed and he's going to get killed. So that's the thing that actually happens. It's difficult when you're dealing with a God who sees beyond time. And so I can see a reality where there could have been an amicable parting with the Egyptians, and one where Egypt is also delivered in a way that Israel eventually becomes. One where God becomes both the God of the Egyptians and the God of the Hebrews, and he's able to make everyone happily part ways. And so Egypt is free in addition to Israel, all because they all let the Israelites go off and worship God. That's a conjecture. We don't know what would have happened if Pharaoh had said, okay, go off and worship for 3 days and come back. We know that's not what happened. And God knew that wasn't what was going to happen. But I think God was giving an out. He was giving a more peaceful way forward. He didn't start out with immediately the big ask of, let all of your slaves go.
I almost wonder, though, it is an option for a more peaceable exit. But I think, too, these are people who generationally have not been able to participate in or practice their faith. And so this is like a reset for them. This is the covenantal reminder for the people of, this is what we do. This is how we operate. This is the wake-up call. And by doing an offering to the Lord, it's a pledge of allegiance.
Yeah, I would agree. This is the first time sacrifice is brought up or thought about since Jacob. Joseph did not sacrifice at all that we've seen. And
as slaves, if they were working under a brutalist civilization like Egypt is said to have been brutal to them and make their lives miserable, there's no way they would have been permitted, even if they wanted to. So you put a note here about Luke. What's that all about?
Yeah, so this could be reading too much into the text like we've discussed before, but I do think there's some sort of connection here that I haven't been able to flesh out. But like the 3 days idea is interesting, especially in connection to obviously Jesus, who died and was resurrected 3 days later. But Moses here being asked to do a sacrifice from the thorn bush connection there, but Passover, what's getting ready to happen, the connection to the Passover with Christ. and this Egyptian story, the Exodus here, and then Elijah also. So Luke 9 is the transfiguration, and basically Jesus is on the mountain talking to Moses and Elijah about his Exodus. So like even in the ESV, like there's a footnote, it says Jesus is talking to them about his departure, but the actual word there is Exodus. So why is he talking to Moses and Elijah, who's already connected to the Passover and later Jewish tradition? Because he is believed to bring the Exodus of the new kingdom. So to me, there's something there. I haven't fleshed it all out, but those are the points that I see major connection to here, but haven't gotten to work out fully in a cohesive blanket of weaving and connection.
So why do the women need to ask neighbors for gold, silver, and clothing, and why do they need to dress their children in those things? Is asking the neighbors code for plundering Egypt?
It's not really code, because the Bible pretty much does say, in this way you will plunder the Egyptians.
Yeah. But it's like a polite, but ask your neighbors. I don't know.
Yeah, but it is interesting. They're not forcibly taking anything. Basically, God's saying, ask them and they'll give things to you because they're going to be favorably disposed to you. But the question is why?
It reminds me of when Abraham and Isaac went to Egypt and got very wealthy after tricking them.
But this isn't an instant of trickery. It's literally go to your neighbors, go to the people you're aware of, and ask them, and they'll give stuff to you.
Yeah, it could be a callback to Abraham and Isaac didn't need to do what they did for God to provide wealth for them. Just ask. We know that there's going to be, and I can't wait to cover it, but the cosmic war that is about to happen in Egypt, and even the Egyptians realizing who the true God is and giving stuff to the Israelites, or even going with the Israelites and becoming part of the nation themselves. There is signs that God is who he says he is, and even other nations recognizing that and giving to the Israelites in this instance.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting tying this into the modern day. There was a recent video that was released by Nick Shirley where he went to Cuba and he was interviewing all the Cubans about their thoughts about the current situation. And the Cubans are absolutely terrified because they have a very tyrannical government and they don't have freedom of speech. And so a lot of them weren't willing to answer questions. But you could tell that pretty much all the people were well aware of the situation, that they were well aware of how corrupt and terrible the government is and how the people who were reigning over them were evil and a lot of the times idiots. And so they didn't have any ill will towards America, which they could just as easily blame for the current rough conditions they're living in. They didn't. And so I see some of that, oddly enough, in Egypt this period. It seems to me like the Egyptians, like you were talking about, Cody, they get that their gods are false gods. They get that their king is not necessarily a false king, but he's reigning falsely. He's not dealing fairly. And there's a lot of bad things that are happening. And then God comes in, and a lot of bad things do happen to them as a result. And yet, it leads to good happening. And so it seems to me that they don't blame God for the things that happen. They blame Pharaoh. And so when the Israelites are able to leave, they rejoice with them. And many of them also do leave and become Israelites as well. Now, it would be nice if more of them did. If the story ended with all of Egypt leaving Israel and everyone worshiping God together, that would be great.
It reminds me of earlier in this book where we talk about Pharaoh's daughter finding Moses and being like, yeah, he is a son of the Nile. And everybody's, yeah. I wonder how much of the pagan religious stuff, occultish stuff, was believed by your average person. It's like when I worked for the megachurch and they had that prophet come in, and 80% of us were like, yeah. And then 20% of them ate it up hook, line, and sinker. I think it's human nature and just cultural to have doubters and people who really just don't buy it and don't care.
I believe the statistic is 15% of the population drives the culture. Most people aren't going to buy in all that much to anything that you do. But most people just kind of go along with whatever's happening.
Because you have to survive in your civilization. You have to, in America, you graduate from high school. Some of us go to college, some of us go into the trades and don't go to college. And then from there, you're on this path. It's like the game of life. You really have very few options.
And you got to think the way Genesis left this story is, okay, now they have taskmasters and they're getting beaten and they're getting pushed beyond what the Egyptians were being pushed towards. But Pharaoh made the Egyptians as well, like, have to give up what they owned, had to. So I think they relate and intermingled a lot. So you have Egyptians living with Israelites and definitely marriages happening inside of that. You have all of this intermingling that they relate more with the Israelites than they do with their own ruler. So I think they're going to be sympathetic to them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's easy when we look at these past stories that have a flair of the dramatic and a flair of poetry about them to almost treat them as if they happened in another world entirely from ours. And it's important to remember that the cultures were different, but in the end, we're all still the same people. We're not a magical, different race that exists in the modern world. We're the same people, just with better toys. And we may think slightly differently. The cultures are different, and we need to try to think like the ancient people. But there's a collection of writings on YouTube or a bunch of different platforms where people will collect all of the stupid dad jokes that have been told throughout history. And they're all anything that you would expect us to do today, they did back then. Like people writing things in random spots that no one would see. And it's like, Desmond was here or whatever.
He has a book, all of the euphemisms and turns of phrase from ancient times. They have senses of humor and creative and
we express it all differently, but there's still the underlying idea that people work based on incentives. The culture at the time for the Egyptians incentivized them to work a certain way, but it didn't mean that they bought into it. And so there is an element of tragedy, I think, to the story, where a lot of bad things do happen to the Egyptians, and it's sad. And I think that we tend to stray away from it because I think we all recognize a lot of bad things happen in Egypt to the Egyptians, and we're told that the Israelites are spared. But what about all the good Egyptians?
you think about, I don't know, Egypt accomplished over many generations things that we don't understand even now how they did. The amount of force and control on those people had to have been outrageous, and no wonder it was not sustainable. Same reason Rome and all of that collapsed is because you get big enough and suddenly you just lose control. And I think people get tired of that. They don't, like, we all want the American dream, right? We want to have a house and be the king of our kingdom. And we struggle and fight and work as hard as we can every day of our lives to accomplish that, even though as Christians, we know that we can't take it with us. We still strive for that. And I don't see any other generation as any different.
No, I think they're dealing with a lot of what we deal with in the sense of, like, it's this narrative of us versus them mentality. It's our gods versus your gods. Like, you'll see that play out when Moses is before Pharaoh with the elders of Israel, and the us versus them mentality, and the worry of opposing the kingdom that you're from. We face that, like, in America today, of standing up for what is right. A lot of people struggle with because the repercussions that can happen from the nation that we aren't slaves of.
And there's always the thought, if literally everyone in Egypt stood up and went up against Pharaoh, we wouldn't even have a story here. If everyone got together and said, no, that's enough, everything would have been fine. But that's not what happens. And I think that's often why God doesn't simply punish the leadership of a country whenever he dishes out judgment. He punishes the people as well.
Oh, there's such a good song called Silence is Violence. If you don't act on something, you're guilty.
And I've heard that term misused to the nth degree. It's silly, but there is truth behind it. If you were one of the people watching Irina Zarutska bleed out and doing nothing, there is a measure of culpability for that. If you're sitting on a train and you watch violence, if you're not Daniel Penny, if you're one of the people who instead watched a fight happen and did nothing to help, While instead Daniel Penny is the only guy who gets up and tries to stop a guy who's threatening to murder everyone on the train. And you don't stand up for him when he's thrown into court and thrown into prison for defending you. There's culpability when you do nothing, when you go along with what your leaders tell you to do and you know that it's wrong. And I think more often than not, the 85% that don't drive culture and simply move along with it recognize there's something off, but don't do anything to stop it. We're all responsible for that. I can't get on a high horse and tell everybody that, I'm somehow separate. I'm not. I go along with things all the time, and I feel stupid and dumb for doing it. And then what do I do?
But there are small things that people can do. You don't have to create an insurrection. Vote with your dollar. Don't spend money where people are being unethical.
How many of us even do that? How many?
A lot.
Yeah, but how many really? As a percentage of the population, how many people stop eating at McDonald's even though we all know that it's terrible? It not only is it terrible for you, but the unethical stuff that happens to get that food on your plate.
Yeah.
How many people will even do something as simple as that? And again, I can't throw stones. I have financially supported businesses that stand for things that I don't agree with, and it's difficult to know where that line is. But when you apply it at the maximal level to a nation, to a people who are claimed to be ruled by a God in the flesh, who they probably know isn't, and claim to be ruled by a bunch of false gods, and then God himself shows up and actively, divinely punishes everyone.
I would not want to be on the receiving end.
No, I wouldn't either.
No, in the cultural context to what God is actually punishing, he's picking their gods apart. That's what he does. And we'll go into pretty good detail in that, but he's picking their gods apart. You guys are nothing.
It reminds me of Ellie when she was like 4 and she prayed like, God, don't raise your hand. This is God raising his hand. He's raised it.
He's lifting up that hand. We're about to see it drop.
Yeah, the ultimate Gibbs slap.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to our podcast today. If you liked what you heard, please feel free to subscribe and share and leave a positive review. And if you would like to connect with us on social media, you can do so on Instagram and Facebook at The Logic of God. You can also send us an email at main.thelogicofgod@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening. We hope you have a great day.